I open the second day of our conference, and I'd like to do so by treating this conference with respect and addressing a question of profound significance for our party and our nation: the need for a more humane and safer approach to asylum seekers. I know people will bring different perspectives and deeply held principles to this debate. I know that we do not all agree. But undoubtedly for all of us, motives and views are genuinely held. We know that Australia is a nation writ large because of migration. We should never forget the debt we owe to generations of migrants and refugees who, in seeking a better life, have enriched the lives of all Australians. There can be no doubt that immigration has unreservedly been one of the secrets of Australian success. And wherever Australians travel in the world, we should be proud of the fact that so many Australians are Australians not just by birth, but so many of us are Australians by choice. Now, in our party, a democratic party, everyone's entitled to a view, probably even more than one view. And in this afternoon's debate, every view will be offered, and that is as it should be. This morning, though, I want to be honest with you, and through you, honest with the Australian people. I do believe in a new direction for Labor's immigration policies. I want us to accept more refugees and ensure that we treat refugees more humanely. I also want to guarantee that we keep closed the lethal journey between Java and Christmas Island, which has already claimed, sadly, so many lives. I stand here before you as the alternative Prime Minister of Australia to explain how I have arrived at my position, how I believe that Australia can be the greater, kinder nation that we want our children to see. I stand here to explain what a Labor government should do to deal with the unprecedented global humanitarian crisis of displaced people, and why I have come to believe that this policy keeps faith with our universal Labor values and the interests of all Australians. A Labor government will keep more people safe in a more humane way, safe from persecution by dictatorial regimes, safe from the exploitation of criminal people smugglers who prey upon the vulnerable, safe from abuse in facilities that fail to even meet a basic standard of decency, and safe from losing the people they love, from having their families torn apart by drownings at sea. In addressing this question, unlike our opponents, we do not play to the politics of fear. I never have and the Labor Party I lead will never use labels to denigrate desperate people. Fleeing persecution is not a crime. We do not seek to pander to a noisy, tiny minority who will never embrace modern, multicultural Australia. But there are important truths we must face. There is a history and a reality that we cannot ignore. The challenge before us is real. The questions we grapple with are as elemental as life and death. We must ensure that Australian Navy and Customs official and Border Force people never again face the catastrophic task of pulling bodies from the water off Christmas Island. We must maintain the regional resettlement agreements that Labor introduced, the most effective deterrent and the clearest message to immoral people smugglers and their criminal networks. We know Labor's framework ensured people smugglers could no longer advertise their false promise of settlement in Australia. Within 2 months of Labor's regional agreements, vessel arrivals had dropped by 90%. We also understand in a difficult world where there are now over 60 million displaced people through no fault of their own, that the regional challenge of displaced people seeking a better life will only increase, and their desperation, risking their lives and the lives of their loved one in unsafe vessels, will only become more intense. Delegates, we should never tolerate the exploitation of vulnerable people. But we must never allow people smugglers to take advantage of a perceived weakness. And so, delegates, by eliminating incentives for people smugglers, by ensuring that they are unable to traffic in their lethal lies, we can ensure that Australia provides safe haven to a greater share of refugees and that displaced people arrive here more safely. That is why a Labor government, I believe, must have the option of turning back boats, turning them around, provided it is safe to do so. But delegates, that is why I also say today that by 2025, a Labor government will double Australia's annual humanitarian refugee intake to 27,000 people. And because Labor believes in showing leadership in our region, we will dedicate a portion of our program to resettling refugees from our region. We will abolish temporary protection visas, which trap people in that unfair state of limbo. We will reinstate the United Nations Refugee Convention in the Migration Act to reverse the Abbott government's retrograde efforts to undermine international law. And at a time when international humanitarian need is greater than ever, when we all were witness to the shocking images of deaths in the Mediterranean this year, Labor understands that our obligation to be good global citizens does not finish at the low watermark of the Australian continent. A Labor government will deliver a historic $450 million contribution to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. This will boost the capacity of the UNHCR in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. And beyond this, we will take up the overdue leadership role within our region, working and engaging with our neighbours, especially our largest and nearest neighbour, Indonesia. We will build a humanitarian framework to address the significant long-term challenge that affects all of us in Southeast Asia. Delegates, Labor supports regional processing, but processing offshore does not, for 1 minute, mean we can offshore or outsource our responsibility to treat people fleeing from persecution with humanity. We can never offshore the humanity required of us to treat other people. Vulnerable people should never be subject to degrading violence in Australia's name. And to guarantee the safety of all in detention, Labor will work with our international partners to implement independent oversight of every Australian-funded facility. And we will make sure that refugee claims are processed as quickly as possible. So Labor will restore access to the Refugee Review Tribunal and increase transparency for processing times. Above all, a Labor government will fulfil the solemn duty we owe to the youngest people in our nation's care. If we are elected, we will end the moral shame of children in detention as quickly as possible. And we will establish an independent children's advocate. This will be a strong voice, separate from the department, separate from the minister, separate from government, serving only the interests of children seeking asylum. And in addition to the existing protecting whistleblower safeguards, Labor will legislate to impose mandatory reporting of any child abuse in all facilities. This, I believe, is Labor's comprehensive plan. It's a plan that will ensure that Australia takes our fair share of refugees. It's a plan that says that refugees in our care are treated with greater dignity and more humanity. It's a plan, I believe, that ensures that Australia steps up and fulfills a greater responsibility as a good global citizen. Delegates, you know and I know these are complex issues. You know and I know that we engage with them intellectually, morally, emotionally. But I did not enter politics to shirk hard issues and hard decisions. I stand here determined for our country to be responsible in the world and secure at home. Determined for us to be a welcoming, kind, compassionate and safe destination, and determined that Labor will achieve this for Australia. Thank you.